All right, man, peace. So, brothers, I would say that maybe for like the last 4 or 5 months, one of the overwhelming narratives that is starting to be propagated on the internet, social media, and even sometimes on the national airwaves is that the reason why Antonio Brown is having these meltdowns is because of the aftermath of the unbelievable hit that he suffered at the hands of Vontaze Burfict in the playoff game that the Pittsburgh Steelers played against the Cincinnati Bengals, and that he is now enduring the onset of CTE. And I've always stated, and I know this for a fact because a lot of those guys come onto my YouTube channel and have made some of those observations or tried to push those sentiments to justify why Antonio Brown is doing what he's doing. And I've stated, as many other people have stated, that if you paid attention to Antonio Brown's career, he's always been an agent of chaos. I stated this as long as 3 or 4 years ago, that Antonio Brown was just the same as Odell Beckham. When everyone was trying to act as if Odell Beckham was the most outlandish wide receiver in the NFL, I used to say Antonio Brown is no different. The only difference is that the organization that he played for, the Pittsburgh Steelers, was a bit more stable, and the coach had a little bit more control over the roster. And even with that, Antonio Brown went out of his way to make himself the center of attention and do things that constantly showed that he had very little understanding of prudence and discernment, time and place, and what was appropriate. He had no decorum, never had those things. And then when you combine that with the new modern wokey-woke agenda to once again make the so-called black man believe that any form of structure and order is a sign of oppression, and then combine Antonio Brown with the LeBron James philosophy of I'm quote-unquote more than an athlete, that basically was a cocktail for destruction. If you've ever heard Ryan Clark speak, he's always stated that Antonio Brown was a powder keg. Going back 7 or 8 years with Pittsburgh, Ryan Clark always said that once Antonio Brown gets his money, he's going to be uncontrollable. And that's what we started to see once he received his money. But the real question is why? Is it because of upbringing? Is it because of CTE? Why has he all of a sudden taken his shenanigans to the next level? Is it because of how he was raised? Is it because of the aftermath of cumulative hits in the NFL? Or is it, as I've always stated, that he's an ardent Luciferian, a practitioner of the Kabbalah and other forms of the quote-unquote black arts or witchcraft per se? And these forces, these energies have now taken control of him in combination with his programming starting to break down. Most monarch children, or MK assets, start to break down in their early 30s. Or maybe it's a combination of all three things. Who knows? I'm going to provide some of my perspective in the aftermath of this video just to show some of the numerological elements and the symbols that are pervasive in the Antonio Brown storyline that tell me that he's just another actor on the world stage whose goal it is and whose role it is to make sure that he is as distracting as possible before they find a way to end his script, whether it be some type of regeneration within the NFL as a character in the league, or maybe they'll stage his demise. Who knows? So anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
All right, the rewards and win-at-all-cost culture of football may have enabled the bizarre and entitled actions that led to Antonio Brown being arraigned, handcuffed, and charged inside a Fort Lauderdale courtroom this morning.
Brothers, as we can see here, this is not happenstance that he's wearing the quote-unquote turquoise suit and the green sweatshirt. That's to denote that he is the quote-unquote god of fertility. He is playing Tammuz or Adonis per se. I'm going to delve into some of these things in the aftermath of this video.
But I reject any insinuation that football caused his downward spiral. Last week, Netflix released an Aaron Hernandez documentary that basically blames Hernandez's depraved actions on football.
Well, they tried to act as if they were, quote-unquote, blaming his actions on football, but they were not sure if they wanted to blame CTE or the fact that he was a frustrated homosexual. But notice, they never mentioned what they found in his prison cell after they allegedly found his dead body there. They also found certain inscriptions on the wall of the prison cell, but they left that out of the documentary. When I do my review of this documentary, we're going to assess some of the factoids that were mentioned within the 3-part series.
The doc insinuates that CTE played a major role in Hernandez becoming a violent murderer.
Aaron Hernandez was another Monarch athlete who spun out of control. That's what he was. But you'll notice that at the very end, they mentioned that he was molested as a child, but they refused to make the correlation between his molestation and his alleged homosexuality. I mean, let's be for real here. Are people born homosexual, or is homosexuality the byproduct of some type of emasculation of young boy children in the form of sexual assault? Which one is it? Once again, they're trying to creep in the pedosexuality and normalize it in a certain way. So the new thing is you have to accept homosexuals who were raped as children, but we're not going to address the person who raped the child.
Insinuation is ridiculous, but that's where we're at with the media's war on football. Anytime a football player does something criminal or inappropriate, there's a segment of the chattering class that wants to blame the behavior on the hard hits in football. Over the past year, since we've witnessed and learned more about Brown's sociopathic behavior.
And Antonio Brown is the quintessential pro-blackity black. He talks all this shit about the white man. He calls them crackers, this and that, but he surrounds himself with Caucasians. The Caucasians are his filmmakers, they're his cameramen, they're his lighting guys, they're his documentarians. They follow him everywhere, but supposedly he hates the so-called white man. Yeah, okay.
There have been people suggesting Brown's dissent can be tied to Vontaze Burfict's concussion-causing hit in 2016. People making this suggestion just want to scare moms from allowing their sons to play football. Antonio Brown and Aaron Hernandez have something in common with the overwhelming majority of America's criminally incarcerated.
Let me say this very quickly before Whitlock goes into his stance on this issue. I grew up back in the 90s watching Jay Rice and Michael Irvin and Sterling Sharp, Herman Moore, Shannon Sharp take hits of that magnitude with far greater frequency than Antonio Brown did. And I don't remember them acting out in the way that Antonio Brown has been acting out. Now, Michael Irvin was crazy. And who knows, maybe if there were as many cameras around back then as there are today, we'd have a different appraisal of Michael Irvin. Who knows? But Michael Irvin has always seemed to be someone who has a certain sense of decorum and knows that his conduct in public and on camera is going to affect how he's perceived. Antonio Brown has a complete detachment from that, which shows me that he is a microcosm of the character of Truman in The Truman Show. He basically is just playing out a certain role. And that normally is a hint that a particular high-level or high-profile athlete is under Monarch programming. They just don't seem to care about what's going on with themselves as they go through their breakdown. And not even top-level athletes or Monarch athletes. Also MK assets in Hollywood. We saw this with Britney Spears maybe 8 or 9 years ago when she shaved her head bald and started waving the umbrella around. They go through these breakdowns around the age of 30, especially those who were placed under the Disney programming. Antonio Brown, as we're going to see later on in this video, seems to have an occult knowledge of the Kabbalah, of Aleister Crowley, the veneration of the quote-unquote cube of Saturn, and of course his favorite, the quote-unquote goat, or the Capricorn, the horned goat deity that seems to be the favorite of so many of these top-shelf athletes.
They're products of broken, dysfunctional families. There's no mystery here, none at all. We know what happens to kids raised in dysfunction. They self-medicate with drugs and alcohol, struggle to connect emotionally, and demonstrate antisocial behavior.
And they also tend to join gangs because they're searching for that level of familial bond or connection that they're missing at home. And of course, that feeds into the prison industrial complex.
You want your kids to be mentally healthy, happy, and well-adjusted? The two people who created the child need to form a stable, happy, and well-adjusted family.
And what that means is that the so-called black man has to use far greater distinction and discretion in understanding what a wife material woman is as opposed to a concubine level woman. The vast majority of females in this society are concubine level females. You have to take your time to get to know the woman. And prior to all that, before cats establish a serious relationship with the woman, you have to make sure that you can provide for yourself in every way, shape, and or form. A lot of cats set themselves up for disaster. They don't have their shit together, but they just want some coochie so bad. And then after a while, they don't want to lose the sensation of having a woman with them, so they get desperate and impregnate the woman, and they don't have a real job. They do not have a real income or revenue stream coming in, And that just leads to more and more dysfunction that passes down to the child, because the woman eventually is going to get bored and frustrated. I don't give a shit about how big of a crush she has on you early on. Once shit gets old, you're going to see the real her. That being the Kalima aspect, the destroy and rebuild aspect, where they kick the old guy out and move a new guy in. And it's not going to matter whether she has a child with you or not. None of that shit's going to matter. So you better take your time with these women.
You want to fight a phenomenon that is destroying kids in American society? Fight baby mama culture. Fight the stupid notion that a single parent can do the job of two parents.
Well, that's because the so-called black woman is being primed to believe that she's a superhero. That's the real problem, Jason Whitlock.
Fight the New York Times for publishing a story that stated black kids need resources more than they do family.
I'm going to be covering this article in another video down the line. This was written by a so-called black woman named Christina Cross, who, of course, as it states here, is a postdoctoral fellow from Harvard University. That's what happens to these Negroes that go to these quote-unquote Ivy League schools. They get prepped and primed to act as vessels of confusion for those Luciferian institutions that they graduated from. Once again, the term Ivy League is an allusion to the Bacchus. That's why when you graduate from college, you receive your baccalaureate degree or your bachelor's degree. That's in reference to Bacchus. That's what the quote-unquote university system, that's where it comes from. So this person right here, Christina Cross, all she was an attendee to a grove. She's a graduate from a grove, so she's a low-level witch. That's it. I'm not saying that brothers and sisters out there should not go to college. If you can go to college or university, the point of you going there is to prepare yourself for life after college so that you can make a lot of money. But people go there and they just believe everything that is told to them. And then they come out like zombies trying to teach that bullshit to their own people.
The article was titled "The Myth of the Two-Parent Family."
Let's understand something right now. If the so-called black woman is devoted to making sure that she's the only person raising the child, what that means is that she's always going to kick the man to the curb and marginalize him in some way, shape, or form. That means that she is confederate in effeminizing the young boy. And it's at the point now where they're ready to admit that their intention is to effeminize young boys, because they want them to accept that there's no such thing as a masculine and feminine spirit per se within your husk or within your body. They want you to believe that your spirit is asexual and that you can decide what your gender is. So that's why they're trying to cast out men, especially men who are not spineless. Once again, so-called black men, take your time with these females. If they're trying to rush you, it's most likely because they have certain agendas planned and they're tired of acting. They want to make sure that you're willing to play along with them, meaning understand that they are the screenwriter, the director, and the producer of this play. They're the lead star as well, and all you are is a supporting actor who has to read your lines. If you're not willing to read the lines that the modern superliberal female has written for you, they want you out of the equation. They want you out of the situation. That's why they'll make statements like, so where are we going with this? What is this relationship really about? Y'all only been talking for a month and a half, 2 months. And the bro wants you to make all these silly promises. You understand? So you have to make sure that you take your time with these women.
Let me tell you what the myth is. The myth is that football is a detriment to young boys. Broken, dysfunctional families will destroy more minds of kids today than the NFL has in its 100-year history. Print that, but don't fight football. Football is one of the last tools we have to put men in the lives of young boys who are disconnected from their fathers. Football is a refuge for young boys seeking direction out of dysfunction. Soccer and tennis and baseball are sports that cater to two-parent families and their kids. Football is a sport that places welcome mats at the door of the desperate and dysfunctional, and it tries to guide them in a better direction.
Yes, all that is well and good, but what you're describing is a Band-Aid. That's never going to be the solution for the so-called black community. So football has its place, but the real solution is that the so-called black man has to return back to his power, that being the Most High, and he has to start using far greater discretion and understanding when initiating any of these quote-unquote relationships. You have to come to an understanding of where the mind of the woman is that you're dealing with, because the woman is a great, great actress. All women are actresses, all of them to some degree. And when things start to go bad with them, it's because they're getting tired of acting. The same shit that used to make them giggle and that they thought was cute when they first started messing with you, down the line, that's going to be the same thing that they can't stand. You know, when they first met you, they're like, oh yeah, I like the fact that you're a man of the world. You know, you like to go out and you go to museums and you go out to lounges and restaurants and stuff. After a while, like, damn, you always out in the street? Why you always out in the street? Or if you're a cat that like to stay home and chill out, oh yeah, I love that about you. You're a real mature man. You know how to be at home and you like to go over certain things in books and do research. After a while, damn, what, you some type of hermit or some shit? So the moral of the story is that you can never really take the woman that seriously. You have to make sure that you know who you are.
Antonio Brown grew up in dysfunction. His dad fathered a bunch of kids by a bunch of women. AB's mom booted him out of the house when he was a teenager. Football saved Brown. Its sin was shielding him from the full consequences of his childhood dysfunction. Those debts are now due and being charged. All right, joining the desk now are Fox Sports analysts TJ Houshmandzadeh and Rick Bucher. Marcellus, get us rolling. Football is the cause of Antonio Brown's behavior.
No, I do not. I think that the cause of Antonio Brown's behavior is that he's going through self-destruct programming. I think that at some point in his life, Antonio Brown was initiated into the Babylonian Kemetic Mystery School system. Maybe it was at Central Michigan, who knows? Once again, Michigan seems to be a hotbed for Monarch athletes. Maybe it occurred there. Strangely enough, he was at Central Michigan at the same time as J.J. Watt. Now, what are the chances that two players of that level of excellence were at the same school at the same time, and both of them were not particularly highly ranked coming out of high school, and they both end up in the NFL, and talent-wise and production-wise, they would both be first ballot Hall of Famers? So that just seems very strange to me. But once again, we're just going to go over certain things in the aftermath or the epilogue of this video so that I can substantiate some of my assertions about Antonio Brown. At first, I was speculating over whether or not, I already knew that he was a venerator of the quote-unquote GOAT god, the Baphomet. He's made that very plain. The only question that I had was whether it was something that he chose to do or that was a part of his programming. And the more that I watch him, I see that it was a part of his programming.
It's not the cause, but being a former football player, it certainly is a contributor. To what degree is a conversation we can have. My first concussion ever was not on the football field. It was on the playground. Got pushed by some gangsters, some blood, pushed me. Next thing I know, big hole in my head, 9 stitches, concussion. Fast forward a few years, I'm on the football field, another concussion. Fast forward a few more years, another concussion. So here's the thing. After the first one, I knew that this is something that is damaging to my long-term health because it's not good for me. The second ones were voluntary because I chose to play a sport that this can be a part of the hazards. Head trauma. Now, you get into the world where AB is, where we're seeing him live and in person crash and burn. Never forget that football helped him take flight.
Let's also never forget that right now Antonio Brown is living a real-life reality show. I'm going to say it again. He's living a real-life reality show. He is filming himself. He is the proverbial Truman. Please understand that there's a reason for this. Once again, it would not surprise me if he films his own demise.
To absurd levels, to dream fantasy world levels, where we can't blame football.
Once again, the combination of green and blue, in my view, is meant to be a manifestation that he is a quote-unquote fertility god, whether you want to call him Happy or Ea or Tammuz or what have you. But whenever you see many of these assets wearing the green, especially in conjunction with some type of animal symbol, he happens to not have on an animal symbol with this attire, but the blue and the green coloring especially are always associated with fertility, both of land and sea.
For what happened to him. But as I've been through a transition from the football field to the real world, your circumstances, your conditions, your mental health comes into play. And it can be triggered by some of the contributing factors from the head trauma and football.
Well, I think that that's a key term, trigger, because triggers are used to activate certain alters within the minds of MK assets. For example, you might know a keyword or a sound or color that might make someone who is placed under mind control revert to another personality type. I believe that that's the reason why sometimes Antonio Brown starts to spaz out. And all people are programmed to a certain degree. Every last one of us. We could think of something that occurred in our life, or if we were to see someone out on the street, suddenly that might make us feel a certain way, whether happy or sad or envious or regretful per se. You might see your mother and all of a sudden you flash back to when you and your mother went to the park when you were 7 years old, and now you're filled with jubilation. The human mind works associatively. So that's why those who understand how the brain works are able to install certain alters and also associate them with certain triggers. The key is making the subject believe that those are real memories. A lot of these concepts were covered to a certain degree in the film Inception, starring Leonardo DiCaprio.
Junior Seau, the late great, as I did personally, it's also circumstantial what's going on in your head and in your world. So I don't blame football, but certainly there is a piece of the game.
Now, I believe on the left side of his turquoise blue blazer, he has the heart with the arrow through it. The heart, of course, is the symbol of the boy god, Cupid, or Harpocrates. It's also the symbol of Bel, the quote-unquote confounder. For those of you brothers who read the scriptures, I believe that it's in Isaiah the 46th chapter where it mentions Bel the confounder. It also mentions Nebo. Bel was one of the gods of confusion. He was the inspiration for the character known as the Riddler of Batman fame or Batman lore. So I have very little doubt, once again, his attire is associated with the character that he's playing. And as you'll see, he's also doing the horned hand sign for the quote-unquote call god, which all that is the hang ten sign of quote-unquote Polynesian or Hawaiian fame. And what that actually is a salute to the horned god Baal, also known as the Baphomet. As long as it's an animal with horns, it's associated with the horned god, whether it's Baal as the bull or Khnum as the goat. But as we know, he worships the quote-unquote goat god. He also worships the horn god, but we're going to cover that a bit later.
The hazardous part of our game that can set a base for some of these other issues to come from.
My issue is that the scale has been tipped in the wrong direction, because you mentioned that there's a combination of personal responsibility and culpability, and then there are the circumstances and the conditions within which you grow up, or the things that happen to you that influence who you are and what you do. We have now become a society where we place everything on the circumstance. Victimhood and victimization, and it's not my fault, losing the personal culpability for the choices that we make.
That's because people are being raised to worship themselves. That's why everyone is so confused. A brother just posted a link to video footage of the comedian Ari Spears trying to promote atheism amongst so-called black people. All atheism does is lead to greater and greater frustration because the human mind does not have the ability to have the answers. The human mind does not have the ability to understand exactly why everything is befalling him. So what man in his frustration tries to do when he's trained to worship himself is question the Most High, as opposed to thanking the Most High for providing him with lessons. You receive lessons in life based on hardships. Life is not supposed to go your way. The nerve of man to be presumptuous enough to try to assert that the only good God is a God who's always good to him. If you grow up with a strong father, your father is not always going to tell you things that are going to make you feel good. He's going to present you with certain scenarios and hope that you respond in a way that's going to force you to grow as a person, because life is going to be filled with obstacles and stumbling blocks. That's what a father does. And the overall role of people here on the earth is to play out their role so that they can discover whether or not they're worthy of the kingdom to come. And that entails faith. But you know what? I'm going to be covering a lot of those concepts in the video that I do on that footage from Ari Spears, because I'm definitely going to make a video about that somewhere down the line. Antonio Brown, one of the reasons why he's in the condition that he's in is because he worships himself. As I've told you, brothers, you'll see one of the main themes of these celebrities is they have that I am theme. I am as in I am my own God. They're Masons / Luciferians. You understand that? So they view themselves as their own God. And you see many of these dingbat niggas, they'll come in these comment sections talking about God is inside of you and all this dumb shit. No, when the Most High is dealing with you, he provides you with insight so that he's always with you and within you once you ingest his word. Like it tells you about Ezekiel that he ingested the role of the Most High. Or John the Revelator in Revelation the 10th chapter, that he ingested the role and the role was bitter, meaning he gained knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. The Most High was within him. It was proverbial, it was metaphorical, it wasn't literal. So that's what it means for the Most High to be inside of you. It does not mean that you are your own God.
Is no longer in vogue. It's always someone or something caused this to happen to me, particularly when it comes to people in the spotlight. We want to believe a certain thing about them. And so when they don't live up to what we want them to be, it's because of something else. I look at this situation and I look at Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown demonstrated that he made poor choices and poor decisions. His decision making was not very good long before these recent incidents.
Absolutely. Antonio Brown's track record goes back years. So this notion that a lot of his poor treatment of himself and others started with the Vontaze Burfict hit is nothing but nonsense and an attempt to once again take away attention from who the attention should be focused on in a way to help him become a better person and cast it on everybody else. And that's what the woke mindset is really about. Everything is somebody else's fault. It's never my fault.
Over the last year or two, I can't put that on CTE. I have to put it on how the values that he was taught, the principles, what he grew up with.
Right, but was he raised with any values or principles? A lot of these cats have never had guidance a day in their fucking life. That's why I have this series called Black Man Protect Your Seed, man. Because if you're not protecting your seed and not guiding them, what you're basically doing is creating a gremlin for the next generation of people to have to deal with in the so-called black community. That's all you're doing. That's also why I talk about who are the real coons. A lot of woke Negroes love pointing the finger at so-called black people who think differently from them because they don't have the intellect to combat those ideologies. So they just castigate them and call them coons and sellouts. But if you ask any of these woke Negroes, what is your end game? What is your plan? They have none. The real coons are the drug dealers, are the men who are bringing children into this world with women that they have not vetted and have no real intention on presiding over the child or over the family. These gang members, they're the real coons, so on and so forth. Anyone who's destroying their own people, you're a damn coon, man. And you deserve to be destroyed. You either have to repent for your actions or be removed because you're a cancer to your own people. That's the bottom line.
And believes in making his decisions. That is at the heart of all this. Even if you have issues with what's happening to you in football, you make that choice and you take your own discovery in terms of what it is doing to you in a particular situation.
I think football is the cause of it, but I'm going to spin in a different direction. It's not from the effects of playing football. It's his divorce from football.
Well, here's the problem with that. Antonio Brown was acting bugged out before he was divorced from football. He was bringing a lot of hijinks onto the football field before he was removed from the NFL stage. So I can't really buy that one.
To play football, like I've been concussed. I've had my helmet knocked off and then hit, and I went to sleep for about 4 minutes.
But you say you could beat Manny Pacquiao. I promise you, Manny Pacquiao put you back to sleep for 4 more minutes, brother.
We've all had concussions. His divorce from football is causing him to lash out and just do these crazy, erratic things.
No, it's not. What's causing Antonio Brown to do these crazy and erratic things is that he's been a crazy and erratic Negro his whole life. And at some point in time in his life, he decided that he was going to embrace various esoteric concepts. There's no doubt about it in my mind. The symbols are too pervasive all around him and within his domicile. So those symbols were either taught to him, he's an initiate within many of those esoteric or occultic forms, or those images were embedded within his subconscious mind when he was placed under the programming, either as a child or at some point in time as a young adult.
He can't play. He's felt, I've been suspended without being suspended unfairly, and I'm just going to lash out and do this and do that. And what you said is 100. Without football, you sign me up for football and you tell me when I'm coming into the NFL, these are probably the consequences. You probably will have CTE. You probably can't walk. You probably can't do this. Would you still play? I'm signing 100 out of 100. I'm taking my chances.
Of course, and that's why I've always stated the NFL will never have a problem with talent as long as America has so many destitute populations of color scattered all across the country. So this notion, as I already covered in a previous video, that the NFL should cater to women and have a female head coach, and if they don't do that, mothers are going to stop their children from signing up to play football. That's asinine. That is completely erroneous. I promise you, the average single mother in the hood would rather her super athlete's son spend 3 hours at football practice than 3 hours standing on the corner.
Because when you come from Section 8 in the projects and nothing, and you living off government, this is our way out. At least that was my only. School wasn't a way out for me. I didn't graduate from high school, and I've said that plenty of times on this show. School wasn't a way out. The people you look up to are the people in the streets or the guys you see on TV playing sports. Football is our way out, and I'm here because of football. You might have concussion, you might have CTE at 50 or 40. I'm taking that chance because this was my only way out.
My overall pushback is like, we 10 years ago, I would say, came up with CTE is the worst thing that happened in football. And it changed everybody's conversation. And then all I kept thinking about, well, hold on, man. I've been seeing Dick Butkus and I'm friends with Jim Brown. And I see all these old football players that weren't having these problems. And they're.
Well, Jason Whitlock, you cannot really say that because you have no idea what guys are suffering from behind closed doors and behind the curtain. Please keep in mind that cats like Dick Butkus and Jim Brown were born in the late 30s and early to mid 40s, etc. And they were raised with a different understanding of what manhood is and what you should be able to tolerate and move past. And a lot of these cats are probably suffering in silence. You never know. Just looking at Jim Brown, like Jim Brown looks finished. I mean, that brother looks damn near finished. I saw him a while back in a segment on TMZ. The cat could barely get into a car. I mean, really, like that stuff cripples their bodies. Playing all of that hard collision football, it starts to cripple their bodies. Their bodies start to curl up like a damn pretzel once they get past 50, 55 years old.
Less protection for them. They played in a more violent game. And then we move it. Oh, someone says it's CTE. And now anything that goes wrong with a football player, well, it's CTE.
I agree with that.
I just reject that. Having played the game through college, having most of my friends, my best friends, having been football players at the college and some of them at the pro level.
Right, but brother, there's a difference between playing 4 years in high school and 4 or 5 years in college and playing a long and pronounced NFL career where the game is faster and the hits are harder. If you're a cat who's been in the NFL for 12, 13, 15 years, that's a lot of damage on your body, man. That's like sustaining 40,000 car crashes damn near. Why do you think Luke Kuechly hung it up? I'm not trying to substantiate the claims that everything is due to CTE, but there is a correlation there. Do I think that has anything to do with Antonio Brown? No, I do not. Antonio Brown has far more nefarious things going on within his mind and within his spirit and within his subconscious per se.
Just reject that and just go back to what Rick said in terms of the AB's issues. You can trace them all the way back to his teenage years. Long before he ever had a concussion, or maybe he had one in the 8th grade, who knows? But it goes all the way back to his teenage years. And if you look at all the data about who ends up in criminal behavior and getting locked up, it's guys from dysfunctional backgrounds. A lot of the issues related to bipolarism and poor mental health stems from a dysfunctional childhood.
Yes, but to take it a step further, a lot of the issues pertaining to bipolarism or schizophrenia Multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder have to do with satanic ritual abuse, which normally entails torture, as well as sexual abuse. That will fragment the child's mind more proficiently than any other form. So did those things occur with Antonio Brown at some point in his childhood? Who knows? It's amazing the percentage of celebrities, especially, who grew up in a sexually abusive household, especially as infants or very young children. I do believe that there is a correlation there. Maybe for whatever reason, the entertainment industry calls them in a harder way than it does people who grew up in a well-adjusted environment for whatever reason. Maybe they're looking for a way to quiet those demons by seeking the attention and the approval of a mass of people through sports or through singing and dancing. But it never ceases to amaze me how often the most prominent celebrities, whether it be in basketball, football, or the music industry or the movie industry, at one point in time or at some point in time down the line, allege that they were molested as children.
Oh, the way we pamper and protect kids from really, don't they say the first 5 years are probably the most important?
Yeah,
if they're not showered with that love and protect, you set them on a course that leads to self-medication and all the things that the tow truck driver said AB appeared to be high, and I believe that. I believe that part of his problems are self-medicating with drugs, but we want to go to football and...
Also keep in mind that self-medication is normally a modality for people who are suffering from multiple personality disorder or quote-unquote paranoid schizophrenia. Those demons start talking to you and you want to quiet their voices.
These are drugs, alcohol dependency, poor values being instilled, things like that.
Yeah, we're saying a lot here, and we can't ignore any slice of this pie. And the slice that I'm going to focus in on is the CTE because of this. We have to remember there's a physical realm that has tangibles. You can see it. It's easy to understand. And there's the mental realm, which has the intangibles, which is vague. And CTE is putting people at a disposition that right now we're going to call pretty vague in understanding is.
Right, but I have an issue with you leaning towards that perspective if by your own admission it's vague. In another sense, what you're really saying is that it's speculative. We really should base Antonio Brown's actions in comparison to the other 1,500 players in the NFL. And when we evaluate him by the other 1,500 players in the NFL, then we have to say that he represents a minute percentage of the players in the league when it comes to his conduct. So how could we blame CTE when all the players in the league are being subjected to the same levels of hits and collisions, etc.? It has to be something else.
Facts. But let's not confuse that from the fact that physically we all have different dispositions. TJ can eat the same thing I eat, and it's going to land on me different than it is on TJ. Just like that mentally. He may be in a disposition where triggered with the CTE, whatever level it is. It doesn't even have to be Aaron Hernandez, who had the worst CTE as 27. Alleged, whatever.
Right, allegedly. Y'all stop stealing my word.
The report said. The point of it is, if your disposition is at a certain heightened level, and then you were a kid who wasn't loved for only one thing, that football, and then you start to divorce that same thing that you're only adored for, now we have to say that all of this is a part of the equation. Because we found a commonality in dysfunctional families, that not having both parents, that's a common denominator. And then what's the common denominator from a lot of these guys who don't transition well? Well, they all played football as well. So I'm not trying to highlight all the negative.
Well, we have to understand that transition, that's really more of an after effect of not being trained properly about what you're going to do over the course of your life. A large percentage of NFL players tend to end up broke after their careers are over. A large percentage end up divorced and broke, or really divorced because they're broke. I have no idea why these players get married while they're participating in the league. You're never going to meet a female that you can be sure actually likes you for you until you're done playing. But a lot of these guys, they just don't care. But just to get back to the point, Antonio Brown, he's dealing with some issues. And many times you have to be able to see what's going on behind the curtain before you can make an accurate assessment.
factors. I'm just trying to say, let's be clear and transparent about some of the hazards.
I just want to add in, Delonte West has had a difficult time transitioning, has some mental health issues, basketball player.
Yeah.
No one's blaming CTE.
No, and
Correct.
I would say at the heart of it, it's Delonte West, in that he has not identified that he has an issue to deal with.
I think that it's a bit deeper than Delonte West's issue, because I've yet to see Delonte West appear to have any level of knowledge of the Babylonian Kemetic Mystery School system. Antonio Brown clearly does. So that tells me that he's under some form of programming, because I don't think that he's taught it to himself. But who knows? We'll see.
It's your analogy when you talk about eating something that wouldn't bother TJ.
And you, it wouldn't bother you.
Have an issue with you. But whose responsibility is to recognize this isn't good for me? That I shouldn't eat this because it's not good for me? Is that on the people that are offering it, that are providing it?
No.
Or is it ultimately on you or me to say,
Well, yes, it is on Antonio Brown to understand that he's ill, but it depends on how ill you are. If your illness is pronounced to the degree that you no longer can tell up from down, right from wrong, then that means that others are going to have to step in and confine him. And I believe that that is what occurred when he got arrested, or when that situation happened with the moving truck. He was brought in for quote-unquote psychiatric evaluation. In other words, one of his handlers was giving him a tune-up because they saw that he was having a bit of a breakdown.
this is not good for me, therefore I need to go in another direction? I hope this doesn't come off as corny. And this is part of the advice and the guidance and the counsel that I believe that Antonio Brown is missing. Is we're not human doings, we're human beings. The idea that I cannot identify or tie myself to what it is that I do in order to get my fulfillment of who I am and what my principles are about.
Preach.
No one ever taught that to Antonio Brown.
Nope.
And so to your point, I think you're right. I think that the NFL provided a cocoon where we didn't get to see the real Antonio Brown or the issues that he had. But that's not the NFL's fault, ultimately. It's who created the Antonio Brown that made him susceptible to, if he didn't have the NFL, he didn't have anything.
And
Ding. That's the real question, sir. Who created this Antonio Brown? Great question.
sorry, we got to go, but
And isn't it interesting that that was the last real pertinent comment within this segment, that Rick Bucher asked, who is it who created this Antonio Brown?
next thing I would just want to say is I don't want Antonio Brown coming out a year from now, 2 years from now. Oh, it's football. I did all that crazy stuff. It was football. If it wasn't for football, I would have been Larry Fitzgerald.
But what if that's proof?
He might try, who knows? But here's the thing. Antonio Brown, at the pace and the rate that he's going and the direction in which he's going, he might not make it another year. Who the hell knows?
What if that's fact?
I just don't know.
I don't even think you can really.
Right, but how could you prove whether or not it's factual? CTE cannot be verified until the person is dead. But that might be a hint. Who the hell knows?
I don't think you can prove
That's
it.
my
You can
point. But look, let's be real. The NFL was not being forthright in telling everything about CTE for a reason.
Everybody that comes from our background would sign and take that chance and play.
But not our children. I'm not signing my son up for it. He may sign himself up for it and I support him, but I'm not signing him up.
All right, stick around.
So, brothers, this here is a segment from TMZ, and I just want you to pay very close attention to the proceedings because, as usual, TMZ provides far greater access than what we'll see on most of these other media outlets. For whatever reason, TMZ always gets their hands on certain footage. It's of my belief that TMZ is just an extension of the quote-unquote Jewish Defense League, which is just an extension of the Israeli Mossad. That's neither here nor there. At the end of the day, I always call TMZ the Tammuz Network because it's very clear, at least in my view, that that's what those letters are really meant to signify, of TMZ. Just in observing Antonio Brown here, we see him with the quote-unquote suicide vest on, but once again, it is of a very verdant and lush green because he's supposed to represent the quote-unquote green man, or Asar, the man who is risen, the quote-unquote god of fertility, Adonis, or Tammuz. I want brothers to pay very close attention to some of the images that we're going to see here, but we're going to be going over a lot of these images after this video, especially in the epilogue, because what many of these pictorials are going to convey is that without a doubt in my mind, Antonio Brown is just another real life actor on the world stage. In other words, he's under mind control. He's a quote unquote superstar athlete prop who now is going through some form of self-destruct programming. Now he's going to have to be tuned up, and they're going to have to decide what they want to do with him from here. It's almost like that film Moon. For any of you who've ever watched that film Moon, I believe it's starring Sam Rockwell. He basically played an astronaut on the moon who had no idea that he was actually a clone. After 3 years, his body would start to break down. I'm talking about the body of the clone, and he would be replaced by another model. But anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in here.
This is all stemming from an altercation with a moving truck driver that went down earlier this week. The driver says that he went...
Now, brothers, if you're paying very close attention, you're going to see the number at the front of this blue truck here is 777. And the number on the orange trailer part of the truck is 888. For those of you who are not aware, 777 is the number of the quote-unquote Falcon God enclosed within his habitation of the sky, meaning Heru and his consort Isis or Set. 888, at least in the mystic circles or the occultic circles, is the number for the Christ of the Bible. So they're trying to wage a war or play out a war, proverbially speaking, while showing you that yes, Antonio Brown does have Kabbalistic programming. But once again, I'll be covering that in the aftermath of this video.
Deliver a bunch of Antonio's property from California, which he shipped all the way to Florida. And then when he got there and asked for payment, Antonio Brown responded.
And as we all know, the color orange is the color for illumination. It's meant to denote the sun and also self-sacrifice.
Attacking him, getting physical with him. He claims that he was physically attacked, that he suffered injuries from both Antonio and his trainer. And in a 911 call that we obtained, you can hear this right now. He claims that when he arrived, Antonio Brown was smoking weed right in front of him. Take a listen.
I'm a truck driver. I'm making delivery, and the guy is high. He smoked. He threatened me.
That does not sound like a Spanish accent. I know that Antonio Brown is in Florida. That accent sounds Middle Eastern to me.
He's trying to fight. He throws stones in my truck.
So that's what he told police. Cops came. They arrested Antonio Brown's trainer. Antonio, according to police, locked himself in his home. They got a warrant for his arrest. On the warrant, it says that he has been known to possess guns, and he's been not great with the cops. So they were warning the police on how to deal with Antonio Brown. There's this mugshot right there. He doesn't look very happy. He's very upset, as a matter of fact. And then early Friday morning, this morning, he was doing court for his bond hearing. Now, what you should know before we show you this video is a bond hearing typically lasts less than a minute. I'm not even exaggerating. The person who's accused of a crime steps in front of the judge, and the judge decides what bond should be at depending on the allegations against you, and there are some other factors too, but it usually doesn't take a very long time. Like, oh, you allegedly robbed a bank? Okay, your bond is set at $1 million.
There's a bunch of people who are waiting to see the judge, so it's very quick. You stand in front of the judge, and that's it. You move on.
Right, but that's not what happened at Antonio Brown's bond hearing. This thing turned into like a full-fledged trial right in the middle of the courtroom, to where like the judge and people were like, guys, this is not the trial. This is just bond. Watch.
Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning, Mr. Brown.
Good morning. I'm going to object irrelevant. If I can make it